people these days don't like being sold to. I don't think anyone ever liked being sold to, but now especially because they could just ignore you. And if you're talking about what you're doing, they're not listening unless they see that you can solve a problem of interest to them. I mean, my favorite phrase that I like to say is with them. What's in it for me? And unless you know what's in it for them and how it's going to help them hit their goals, it's totally irrelevant to them.
We got a really good episode for you all here today. We have Brian Schneider. He's the VP of Business Development at ROSA, and he's got 23 years experience selling in the life science industry, and he's been at 8 different startups, oftentimes as the first rep, so he really knows what it's like to start with nothing, but really excited for what he has to say for us today.
Yeah, really excited to chat with Brian today on this episode. He's a great leader and a great sales guy, so he should have some really good insights for you.
In this episode, we're going to talk a lot about with him, you'll hear. So what's in it for me? How do you put yourself in the customer's shoes? Don't be pitching. Brian's even going to get you guys with a real quick tip on what to use at a trade show or a vendor show. So we got a lot of good stuff in this episode. It's jam-packed. Let's dive right in. Hey, Brian, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Harrison. I'm really excited to be here. Great to see you, Nick.
Good to see you, Brian. Excited you could join us.
Yeah.
All right. So as you know, we start off every episode and we ask the same question. Describe a crazy or funny story that happened to you in your career.
So I had this great time with a one-call close. Where basically, working in the life sciences, always there's this huge, time for sales process. So this was where I was actually talking to the right person at the right time with the right problem, and I had the right solution, and it just closed at that one visit. The challenge is that I was in the immunoassay space, and I was selling an instrument that had a higher cost per test than anything else that was out there. And we had some unique sales points that, differentiated it from the other technology. The challenge was trying to get someone to invest in it. I had some big pharma companies in the translational space who wanted to use it for a diagnostic, but I didn't have any CROs, and at the time, there was no CROs that saw any sponsors that needed it. So it was a chicken and egg problem. So so I need a CRO. I have some people that are interested now, but so I actually did a Google search for CRO near me, I think it was, and I found one, and they were at a local vendor show. I'm like, I'll just go and I'll see what they're doing, and because they're in assay development. So I went to the show, and I just like to typical vendor show, I asked them what they're doing, and they of course they spewed off their their pitch. And I said, hey, I have a sponsor, again, using the language that's familiar with them, who's interested in assay development, but they want to use our assay, but no CRO has it. I'd like to come talk to you about, implementing that kind of assay. Sure. Come. So I was actually the head, the CEO, president of the CRO was at this vendor fair. So instead of exchanging contact information, I literally just pulled out my phone and said, hey, let's schedule a time to come talk. Let's get it on our calendar. So I go and I talk to them, and he wants to pitch his CRO to me. It's a small operation. So we walk around and get a tour of all the instrumentation, what he's using. During this walk, we run into, there's this back room that's got this cover over this big, huge, box. I'm like, what is that? So he pulls off the sheet, and it's it's a robotic system, one of the big names, let's just say. And I said, what are you doing? What are you using that for? Well, nothing right now. Well, what is your plans for it? Well, we're trying to do a multi-analyte assay, basically doing assay on multiple different analytes from the same sample. And I'm like, oh, well, was it in a shroud in the back corner with all, like in pieces like this? Well, we've had someone from the company here for 2 weeks trying to figure out how to make this thing work. Oh, okay. And like, well, what's your sample size? And, and he's like, oh, well, probably like 250 microliters we'll use per sample to get the 4 analytes. And then I said, well, what's this thing? How much does this cost? And they're like, yeah, it's like $350,000, and like, oh, it's not working. Like, how's that impacting your business? And he described, the pain and, how it was causing his problems. So, we go back to his office and he sits down. I was like, okay, well, what are you here for? And I'm like, that robot there that you're struggling to get working, we can solve that problem with, it with no programming. The program's already done. 4 analytes, and the amount of sample you need is only 25 microliters, like 1/10 of what you're using now. Would you be interested in learning about it? Absolutely. How much does it cost? It's 1/10 the cost of that. I'll get it to you for $25,000. He literally like, give me a quote. I'll write out.
Give me a pen. We'll write
So actually, I emailed him I got out of my car. I typed up the quote. I emailed it to him, and I said, "Hey, I can come back tomorrow to pick up the check." And I literally came back the next day, and he gave me the check was sitting there at his front door, and I was like, "Holy mackerel!" I mean, how often does? I mean, I've been doing this for 23 years. It's just literally the only time that has happened. But the key was finding out what his problem was. I had a whole lot of unique sales points about this instrument. Consistency and reproducibility, small volume size. But we were getting hammered on the cost per test because that's what everyone wanted to talk about.
It sounds like in the room as well, the key was not just you listening to the customer, it's the curiosity, right? Because if you'd have gone into the room, right, I'm going to go in, I'm going to sales pitch, I'm going to do our points, you wouldn't have asked, what's the crazy box in the corner?
Yeah, absolutely.
Curiosity leads you to that question.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it's a hunger. You have to have a hunger for what they're doing, what their goals are, what their plans are, and what's getting in front of what's blocking them from getting there. And until you have that conversation, because there's going to be a need for change, right? It always comes down to, you have to defeat the status quo. Otherwise, you're just going to be like, there's going to be no interest in changing. And that only happens through questioning. You have to understand where they're coming from. And I've just seen so much of, people going to pitch. People these days don't like being sold to. I don't think anyone ever liked being sold to, but now especially because they could just ignore you. And if you're talking about what you're doing, they're not listening unless they see that you can solve a problem of interest to them. I mean, my favorite phrase that I like to say is with them. What's in it for me? And unless you know what's in it for them and how it's going to help them hit their goals, it's totally irrelevant to them.
We're going to have hopefully a wide listenership of people from all over the world. And if a experienced US-based rep saying that people don't want to be sold to, you can guarantee that people in the UK and Europe definitely don't want to be sold to, because the US is the most open. Like the British are so against it. When someone says, "Can I help you in a shop?" we have like an allergic reaction. It's like, no, you can't help me. Get out of my way. Right? So if you guys are saying it too, this is a real problem that we need to make sure we address in our process.
I was just saying, I heard a great quote once. It was, people hate being sold to, but they love to buy. So it's like, how can you help somebody feel like they are buying and not being sold to?
Yeah, and it all comes out the question. I was just at a conference recently, and I was just surprised. Like, I'm walking down the aisles. First of all, most everyone is behind their desk. Some of them, of course, got drinks. They got their laptop open, looking at their phone, or they're talking to their colleagues. And then I would go up and I would ask, "What are you doing?" And then they would literally go into their pitch and vomit it out. And they're like, "See what would stick." And I'm like, "Do you even know if I'm, where's the qualifying question? Where's the interest generating question? How do you know it's even relevant to me?" or what
Can you touch on that? Can you touch on that? Because you did this really well. I think it talked to a bunch of people at Synthago, which is when you're at a vendor show, like have that question ready to go, right? So instead of your pitch when somebody asks what you do, I mean, you had a couple really good ones that you shared.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty straightforward. I mean, it depends on what you're selling, but you want to find something, a question that, generates an interest and also qualifies them, hey, I'm at cell biology, right? So, what kind of cells do you work on? Just be curious, hey, yeah, I see you're at cell biology. What kind of cells do you work on? And then, I do bioinformatics or I do blah. I'm like, oh, okay, well, that's great. Well, really, enjoy the rest of your show and have a good time. They're not in my market. Why even bother talking to them? Your job is to get in front of as many people that hit your market. And, if they immediately ask them, like, hey, I help salespeople build revenue, giving them time-tested processes. And, if they knew that right away, they wouldn't go into this huge long pitch about their product because, first of all, should immediately say, hey, can I, hey, this is not the time. I got people to go talk to bring it in, or can we schedule a time to talk? Because I'm curious about what you have to say. I also, would go at a quiet time. So if someone else came up, I say, hey, it'd be better if you go talk to the scientist there because I'm not going to buy your product. Sometimes they would stop and go and talk to them. Other times they would keep talking to me, and I'm like, I'm not your reason for being here. It's very expensive to take you to a show and have you sit in this booth, both your travel time, the time away from your selling. I mean, that was another thing I learned recently was that, I really had an epiphany about vendor shows. Salespeople really shouldn't be going to these things. It's a marketing function. It's a marketing function. I mean, you're basically trying to understand. I mean, it's a great opportunity for the marketing team to ask questions and see what resonates so that they can create the literature and the components for sales. I mean, it's basically a market qualified lead that you come out of a show. Now, if you're a salesperson at a show, I mean, because this happens so often in our space, have an interest generating question, find out what their goals are. Well, okay, so, what kind of sells you in, what are you doing about, how, what are you trying to accomplish? Most scientists want to get data for something, right? So find out what their data is, like what kind of data they need. What do they need for their next publication? What do they need for the next grant? I mean, that's the kind of question that people love to talk about. And then you'll immediately see if they have a fit for you. And then you can ask more relevant questions about like the problem that you solve. So hopefully you know what that is. Otherwise you're really, I'm sure you're really got a problem. I mean, you definitely.
Well, I think that's a big one though, right? Which I think that's a big one though. It's just understanding the problem or the challenge you solve, and also how you might do it differently than how they're doing it today.
Yeah,
I remember I was also at a show and I was talking to somebody. I said, "Hey, tell me about the whatever it was, their product that they had," and immediately all the products, all the specs, everything about it. I'm like, I don't know, like half of what. But like, can you explain like how would people do it today? Like, if they didn't have your box, what would they be doing? And now with your box, how is it better? And it was actually like really hard for them to have that discussion. But it's if you're able to have that dialogue, you can take something that is very complex with all the capabilities, features, and functions, and be able to easily explain it to somebody that is just simply asking a question, wants to know how it can be used in their own workflows.
Okay, what's blocking you? Well, how do you do it now? What is limiting you? What are the challenges of doing it that way? And then if you know anything about the space, you're like, hey, I hear this, and this. Are these problems you're hearing, or is it something completely different? So then you're bringing them insights that they might not have thought about. Okay, so what is the problem with all this manual pipetting? How is that impacting your ability to repeat this experiment, or get the model that you need or the data that you need? How much time are you spending doing this? my favorite conversation with someone is like, how long do you expect to take, to make this cell model? And they always say like 2 weeks or 3 weeks. And I joke and I'm like, yeah, when I was in the lab, the feedback that what I realized is that I always take the amount of time that I think it's going to take. I double it and then move it to the next level of time. So if I think it's going to take, 2 weeks, it's actually going to take 4 months. And everyone finds that incredibly fun. Oh yeah, that's so true.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I can resonate with me. And thanks so much for listening to the podcast. If you could do us a quick favor and share it with someone you know, it would mean the world to us. If you want to uplevel your sales skills or just network with other life science sales reps, check out the Succession community at succession.bio/join. Okay, now back to the show. One thing that you mentioned as well, which is how do you identify these problems? And I think what a lot of sales reps do, especially when they join a new company, is they expect those problems to be predefined and come to them from product or come to them from marketing. And they kind of want this stuff just handed to them on a platter. And I know you're a big proponent of this, but leverage the experience you have, right? Either from previous roles or from actually your conversations, right? If you go out and you have 10, 15, 20 different conversations, you have probably now talked to more people having this problem or a couple of these problems than any of the other, potential customers that you might have. So it's like, how do you consolidate all of those insights that you have and then pull that information out from the customer that you're talking to?
So what I do is that usually when I join, there's at least some customers, even when it's pre-launch, it's hopefully you've at least been talking to somebody who's expressed interest in this. Go and talk to them. Ask them what do they see themselves solving with this? How does it help them? I have a list of golden questions and they always come back to, and then have them describe it. Like, how would you describe this technology to somebody else? And that is those are the key things that then you just take those and compile them. And those are what you say to new customers.
So I think that's a really good point about having these golden questions that you're going to ask the people to gain insights for your customers, for your new customers. Is there a certain level of relationship you need with that person to be able to ask it? Or do you find any pushback, or are people really open to just sharing this?
I mean, you want to bring value to everyone you talk to. So oftentimes I engage with them saying, hey, this is a new product. Or we're looking at how improving our relationships with our clients. I'd love to ask you how you're using this to find out how we can work with you better. Just about everyone wants to, is willing, if they really like what you're doing or have interest in making you better, then they'll talk to you. But this is how I had to start this conversation with every new role. So I don't have a problem with that. Now, is there going to be people that don't respond? Yes, of course, just like everything else. A third, and a third. The third of the people you ask this question to are just going to say no. And then, a third of them will say yes. And then there's that third in the middle that you have the ability to control, how they respond. And I think that is the key to this. It's just come with that curiosity. Hey, I want to help. Again, it's what's in it for them. And it's like, well, you have the chance, we're working on making this product better. Here's your chance to help us improve it. People love to give feedback. Everyone's got ideas about how to improve every product ever sold. So most people are willing to talk to it. So I don't think that having I have had chance, I've worked at companies where, hey, I have the relationship, like a technical support person or the installer, or I have a relationship with them. I'll reach out to them and introduce you. Inevitably, what happens is they get too busy to do that. And then after a month of me annoying them to schedule, introduce me, I'm like, hey, I'm just going to reach out. Is that okay? Yeah, okay. And then that's how I approach it. I'm like, this is my approach. Just want to work with you. In another case, I had someone else reach out for me, and they're like, oh, we're curious if you have any more things that you want to buy. I'm like, that's not what I want to talk I don't want to talk. I don't want to sell them anything. I want to find out their experiences and why they like to work with us, so I can go find more people like them. And then ideal customer profile is so important. Everybody's, I like, oh, you should be able to sell to anybody. Just go talk to them. It'll sell itself. And
besides, now, now, our technology is so good it sells itself.
And I'm like, what? No, it doesn't. It doesn't sell itself. You have to find out what the status quo is, and you have to convince them that the way they're doing it now, the old way, is problematic. And what is the difference between the old way and the new way? Is what's going to motivate them, And then of course, it always comes down to not only the positive impacts, but the negative impacts. Kahneman, I think he got a Nobel Prize for pointing out that the negative impacts of the negative impacts have 2x the emotional impact than the positive gains. But if you do both, then it's 3x than just the positive. So this is where it's really important to
loss aversion, right?
Yeah, loss aversion.
Loss aversion.
The loss aversion and prospect theory.
Yes.
I don't just make this stuff up. I've heard it over and over again from multiple different trainers.
Well, one of the things that you talked about the consequences of not changing, right? Those negative consequences, right? The downsides of not making a change. So how do you ask that question where it's like, hey, how does this impact you? What happens if you don't solve this? But how do you ask that in a non sort of salesy way? Because if I were to ask that to somebody, they're like, oh, he's just trying to sell me something, right? Like, how do you pull that out of somebody, and how do you get them to give you that without it coming across as maybe rude or criticizing the way they're doing something today?
Yeah. So first of all, I try to put it in terms of this is the way other people are doing it. Scientists do it. I talk to people in the space, and this is what I hear they're doing. This is the challenge when they do it this way, and this leads to this, and this. So one of the examples I did with CRISPR editing, which was one of the challenges with CRISPR editing is that everyone thinks it's going to happen the first time. And when they go out and they with all the modifications, they'll pick a model they want to try, and then it won't work. And then they'll have to try it again, and it won't work. And then they try it again the third time. The averages is like 7 times to try to get it edited. So what would happen in your lab if you went 3 tries and you didn't get a result? What would that happen to you? And they're like, yeah, I have to go find another lab, or I literally had a PI, like, if you had a postdoc or grad student, you tried this 3 times and it didn't work, what would happen to them? You're like, I'd ask them to go find another job. They literally said that to me. And I'm like, all right,
Bit extreme. Seems a bit extreme, but just knowing that the average is 7 seems a bit extreme to kick somebody out after 3. But yeah, it's something.
Yeah, so you find out how they're approaching it. Hey, I'm using plasmids, or I'm doing this methodology, and then I say, oh, when I talk to people that do this, I hear this. How is it impacting you? This challenge. And
so you're taking it like a broad, like, hey, from the people that I've talked to, these are the things I'm hearing. Does this resonate? So it's less of a very direct, I'm going to just dig into you and your exact workflow and what you might be doing wrong. You're taking, hey, when I talk to a bunch of people, typically when they work with plasmids to do their editing, they're worried about these downstream implications.
Yeah. And then you change once you work on the negative impacts, and then you come back with, okay, well, but I have been working with some people that have tried this, and this is what they get from that. How would that benefit you?
Now you're looking at the other end, right? Yeah, now you're looking at the positive end. So you uncovered what happens if they don't solve the problem, and then you're also getting them to think forward into the future of what their future will look like when they do solve it.
Yeah. And you don't say, hey, you're doing it wrong. You should try it this way. You say, hey, I found people that are, who are doing it a different way.
Right.
And this is the result they get. The question, like if I get someone to say, I hadn't thought of that, or I didn't know about that, then I know I have their attention. And then I can say, hey, would you like to learn more about that? Or is this of no interest? And then, if they have, yeah, I'd like to learn more about that. And okay, well, if it's at a vendor fair, it's okay. Well, let's schedule a time to talk about it. Because you probably have to get off to another call, and I'd really like to delve into how this is impacting your work, how this can help you. So let's just get out a calendar invite. I've actually scheduled things like I'm at a vendor fair, like at big conferences, and I literally would schedule it for other teammates in California. I'm like, they'll figure out a way. Like, let's put it tentatively on the calendar. And if it doesn't work out, you can always change. It's always easier to change an appointment than it is to like re-engage somebody and, and have that, remind them why. Like, okay, I must have thought this was really important to actually put it on my calendar. And if they're not willing to put it on their calendar, then that it's not real. They're just, it's just smoking mirrors. And then you just not have to waste your time.
100%. Awesome. Well, we're coming up towards the end here, and I want to wrap it up with one last question for you, Brian. Can you help provide the listeners a prospecting tip, maybe a discovery tip, or a closing tip, best practice that they can use to improve their sales skills?
Oh, wow. Where do I start? I think it's always come back. Like I think I mentioned it earlier today. The biggest tip is put yourself in their shoes and find out what's the whiff for them, and have a hunger to understand that. There's no real, script on what questions to ask. But when you're sitting there talking to somebody, true discovery is to understand, to listen, not just to figure out what you're going to ask next, but listen to understand have enough empathy to be in their shoes, because people don't buy for your reasons. They could give a crap about what you think. What they want to know is they buy for their reasons. So find out what the reasons are that are like keeping them from getting what they want done. And I think that kind of change in perspective, people talk about, consultative selling, but that's what it's really about. Having the empathy to put them in put yourself in their shoes, but then have the drive to ask them that challenging question, to say, well, this is what I see, and give them that insight and give them value.
Awesome. Yeah. I think if every seller could think more about what their customer cares about and make their value prop, their positioning relatable to what that person cares about, I think the whole sales community would become much better and more well respected.
Yeah, I mean, I know it's hard. It's hard because you're in front of a client and you're really excited about your product, your technology, and you want to share the knowledge. You want to let people know, but that's selling. That you're selling, you're pitching, and that's customers don't like that. I was at a networking event, and I was talking to scientists, and I'm like, well, what's the most annoying thing about salespeople? They're like, well, they pitch me. They come in and they just start talking, and I'm like, they're not asking you questions, and they're like, no, and like, this is what I'm here for. I mean, this is, have a list of questions. I mean, even now, when I go talk to a client, I have a list of questions that I want to ask. I might not get to them all, but at least it gets that, that tension out of my mind about, well, these are the things that I want to know. So my subconscious is at least thinking about that while they're talking. I'm like, okay, so, clearly I want to focus in on what those problems are. What is limiting from them hitting their goals? What are their plans for how they're going to get their data? What are they being measured on? And then this is how you position yourself. Because again, if it's not relevant to their mission and what they're trying to do, they're just not going to be paying attention. One of my favorite things to do at succession events is to ask people who their ideal customer profile is. First of all, you're like, oh, I don't know who my ideal customer profile is. Like, okay, well, then you got to figure out a way to do that. But then, let me know so that if I'm talking to somebody and they have that problem, I can say, hey, you know what? I can value add to you, refer them to you, even though I'm not going to get anything out of it. Again, it comes back to do good, help others, and maybe make some money out of it. I mean, that's why I do this.
Yep. Love it. Well, I think it's a perfect way to wrap it up here. This has been a great episode. Thank you, Brian, for coming on and chatting with us. And everybody remember, with them.
With them. Yes.
With them. All right. See you, Brian.